The Long Voyage Back, page 195. As he sat exhausted in his cabin and fiddled with the shortwave radio, Neil was feeling baffled. The day and a half since his visit to Greg Bonneville, when he had made his separate peace, had been frustrating. He'd found it easy enough to bluff his way through the 2 confrontations with the authorities challenging him about his not being in uniform. He put on his captain's demeanour and Navy lingo and said he was on special assignment from the Morrison, but had found it difficult to learn what really was happening in the world. Official radio announcements indicate that Morehead City was a safe area. Army policy was that refugees should stay put. They were offering no assistance to people who wanted to move further south. As long as there was no danger in staying where they were, he didn't feel he had any right to take Jean and Frank back out to sea, much less to help Jim desert. Although he himself no longer felt an obligation to serve his country, the transformation of Greg Bonneville was not an example he could use to persuade others. It was too personal. He himself felt the only safety lay in escaping the mainland to sea. To others, this seemed to be simply his mania. Conrad Macklin had disappeared while Neil was on the Morrison, and since he'd stolen some food from the vagabond, Neil assumed he'd seen the last of him. But he'd returned 30 hours later, just 4 hours ago, to inform Neil that though the army had roadblocks up to prevent civilians from fleeing south, a caravan of army vehicles with both military and civilian passengers had been steaming south on Route 17. Macklin had hung around and learned that the army was having problems manning its roadblocks units because some of the troops were panicking at the sight of so many others going south after they had been ordered to stay put. Macklin urged Neil to take Vagabond out to sea immediately, whether Jean and the others came or not. Neil knew that if he didn't take Vagabond out soon, Macklin would find someone else who would. That meant he not only had to worry about choosing the correct course of action, but about Macklin's trying to hijack Vagabond again. With Ollie often aboard alone, there wasn't much to stop him. Neil had tried to delay any participant's action on Macklin's part by telling him he planned to decide on his plans tonight. He'd visited Jean, Frank and Lisa at the refugee centre briefly late that afternoon, and had been discouraged to see that they seemed to be settling in. Both were working hard, making friends, feeling they were making a contribution. Lisa had spent much of the day trying unsuccessfully to see Jim, and had just returned in tears, so Jean was in no condition to make decisions. Her response to Neil's announcement that he wasn't going back into the Navy was a brief stricken look, as if she was frightened by the implications for her own life. Frank told Neil that he could take Vagabond, as if, for Frank, the struggle was over and Morehead City High School was now home. Neil was left frightened and depressed at their state. There was more fallout today. The total's more than 1/8 of an inch since we first got some 4 days ago. Some of the farmers are trying to get it off the leaves of corn and squash and beans, and Pat Neron reports the wind blows it off the wheat and rye, but it's killing some of the plants even lying in soil. The voice over the shortwave radio was that of the ham radio operator from East Tennessee, who Neil had last listened to in the evening the war started. Henry Tickney says his Geiger counter shows it up to 3 rotogens in his soybean fields, which isn't healthy for either him or his beans, but supposedly it'll drop off every day unless we get more. Like most of us, Henry says he only goes out for half an hour a day. 3 new shelters were started yesterday and one's already finished. 8 people moved in with enough food for 2 weeks. We put in Jesse and Marge and William and their 2 kids, Gora and Hilda Lafson, and their son Leo, and the Bartlett's sick girl Tina. Williams run the Exxon station east of town and are sick and don't have anything they can do, and the Lafsons paid for all the material and labour on the shelter. Like I said, the Williams and Tina Bartlett are pretty sick from radiation, and we figure they need the protection. Of course, I guess we all do. Martha Peterson died yesterday, after her sons went away. We couldn't get her to stay in the cellar. The Linkletters and Potters moved south today, using the Linkletters team of workhorses and a wagon Tim built out of an old truck flatbed. They're the 6th and 7th families to leave. Most all of the young people have gone, of course. Most of the old people have chosen to stay. We don't know whether we'll make it or not, but most of us decided it'd be better to die here than live in those camps they've set up in northern Louisiana and Arkansas. I suppose if we had kids it might be different. That's why we help those who feel they have to go. It's kind of sad though, you know you'll never see each other again. The people leaving feel kind of like traitors, and the people staying feel kind of like fools. Still, we do what we gotta do. After the frequency went dead, Neil turned off the set and continued to sit in the darkness of his cabin. He became aware of the faint glow of his wristwatch lying at the base of the radio. It was almost midnight. They were dying in East Tennessee. What? perhaps 600 or 700 miles away, not even that far. Sighing, he turned the set back on, adjusted the earphones and began a slow sweep of the ham frequencies. The first voice he brought in reported increased radioactive fallout and radiation sickness in southern Mississippi, with thousands fleeing out into the Gulf of Mexico. Military authority had ceased to exist. Soldiers as well as civilians were stealing boats, commandeering barges and helicopters to get away. The voice speculated that to the west, towards New Orleans and Galveston, there were a few survivors. Those fleeing east across the Florida Panhandle would probably be overtaken by lethal fallout. He mentioned some towns whose names Neil didn't recognise, but when he checked his small atlas he concluded that the broadcast had come from somewhere less than 100 miles east of Pensacola. Neil moved the dial, bringing in a ship, the Athena, 300 miles out of Boston, asking for medical advice on the treatment of radiation sickness. He brought in a station in Bermuda warning of starvation facing the islanders there. Then his ear caught Raleigh, North Carolina on a frequency filled with static, and he tried to tune it in more clearly. Raleigh was about 200 miles west of Moorehead City. The voice clearer now, a woman's with a strong southern accent, was announcing that she was taking over for a husband who was sick but who wanted her to keep up his daily reports. The radioactive fallout in the last day had increased tenfold, and now everyone was trying to stay below ground. Those who ventured out for more than half an hour took sick quickly. Those who stayed in the cellars or shelters did better. The ground was covered with ash, thick, black and ugly. They were drinking only bottled water, but most had only a limited supply. Electric pumps could no longer be used. They couldn't figure out why there was so much fallout, where it was coming from, and why it was scary. They hoped it would stop raining soon. When Neil switched off the radio this time, he was trembling with great deep dread, almost desperation. They were all doomed. Shelters, putting out to sea, joining the army, the navy, all seemed equally futile. No, that was a lie. He knew it was a lie. Safety lay far to the south and out to sea. He knew that. He could see it for certainty now. Moorehead City, bucolic, innocent, unimportant Moorehead City, was doomed. In a few days it would be overtaken by the fallout. So too would the rest of the East Coast, but the ocean and a run to the south represented hope and life, for him, for Jean, for Frank, for Ollie, for all his remaining friends. Only out there, where the fallout would be swallowed up by the insatiable sea, was their hope for survival. And he knew it was up to him to get them all to act, and to act now. The army was lying. There was no safety left on land. Having made his decision, he stood up, carefully turned off the radio, disconnected the batteries and went up onto deck. Captain Ollie was sitting in the darkness of the wheelhouse talking a lively monologue to a silent Conrad Macklin. Ollie stopped talking when Neil appeared. "I'm taking Vagabond back out to sea," he announced quietly after sitting down opposite the old man. "Good," Captain Ollie replied. "Been wondering how long it would take you." Neil turned to Macklin. "To get out of the inlet, we need another boat to act as a decoy," he said. "A boat with just enough fuel to get to the inlet and create a diversion. I want you to find one, devise a plan for stealing it, and when the time comes, steal it." Macklin stared back at Neil. "You want me to be on one boat while you and the rest are sailing out of the inlet on this?" he said, scowling. "One of us will be with you," Neil answered, "and if possible, think of a plan that won't mean you hitting or killing anyone." "If possible," Macklin said with a sneer. "Ollie, how many gallons of diesel fuel do you figure we need to get 2 boats out into the ocean?" "It's 3 miles from here?" Ollie asked. "Yes," Neil answered. 6 or 7. "That's what I was afraid of," Neil went on. "Since they took all but 5 gallons this afternoon, we'll need more. Macklin, keep an eye open for another 3 gallons of fuel, or more." "Like everyone else in the world," Macklin commented. Neil stared past Captain Ollie with his eyes half closed in concentration, ignoring the comment. "We leave tomorrow night at 10, he finally said. "Who's coming with us?" Macklin asked. "We'll see," said Neil, and he got up to return to his cabin to sleep.